yes, we have immigration experience. Yes, we have esports experience. We know the law, we know the scene. But I think what's special about working with us is that, for example, the way we communicate, like we know what Discord is, and we're happy to talk with our clients on Discord. Whereas I think traditional law firms probably use, email or get on the phone to speak with clients. And yeah, those are more professional, maybe more traditional ways of communication. But when you're talking to a 19-year-old, CSGO player in Sweden, they might not use email or they might not, be able to make an international phone call. So being able to meet our client where they're comfortable, I think is something that we add to the highly stressful experience of immigration.
That's esports lawyer Genie Doi talking about how traditional lawyers sometimes miss the mark when working with esports athletes and what esports lawyers are doing to fix that. I'm your host, Drew Proctor, and on today's episode, I sat down with Genie Doi and Samuel Johnson, two esports lawyers who are defining esports law. We talk about their journeys into esports law, how important lawyers are to the esports scene, and why esports law has gotten more difficult over the past few years. All that and more on today's episode of the Esports Careers Podcast. You guys are in esports law, and that is a very, very unique, and I don't think it's something that a lot of esports fans or potential people looking to get into esports, I don't think it's something that they typically think about as a career field that they could pursue. And so I have like a lot that I just want to unpack and a lot that I want to try to understand. So could you guys kind of both go, I guess, a bit of a summary on who you guys are and your journeys into law, but in particular, I don't know if you guys were doing law before and then you found yourself in esports law, or you picked that up after you started law. But what does that path look like for you guys?
Sure. So I will go first. My name is Genie Doi. I am an immigration lawyer, and I've been an immigration lawyer for about 6 years now. And I am actually new to the esports space. I didn't start working in esports until maybe 3 years ago. And so obviously when I started out and I decided to go to law school, there wasn't a such thing as an esports lawyer. And I had focused my career on immigration. And then around 2017 was when, I think esports really started blowing up, and someone at ESG Law contacted me and said, "Hey, our clients are really looking for some help in immigration. Like, would you be able to work with us and help us out?" And so that's how I started working in esports. Samuel, how did you fall into esports law?
Yeah, so I'm Samuel. I am in my third and final year at the UC Irvine School of Law, and I always knew I wanted to go into law, but I was initially planning to do like trial work. That can mean like litigation, like lawsuits or criminal defense. I had spent a few years doing that before law school, and I was pretty passionate about it. And then in my first year of law school, I worked on this big case against a major rideshare company, the bad one, if you're wondering which one. And I realized that I wasn't sure if litigation was the right path for me. There's a lot of reasons for that, but basically, if you're going to go into litigation, it often means you're going into big law. And for those who aren't familiar with the legal career path, big law is essentially kind of prestigious, large size law firms. And if you're going into big law, it's hard to get there. And then once you're there, there's a lot of time where you really need to establish yourself. And in that time, you don't really have a lot of choices as far as what clients you're working with. And so I determined that really wasn't the right path for me. I wanted to do work where early on I knew the clients to be working with, they were something I was passionate about. And so about halfway through my first year, I was left not knowing what to do with my career. But for some time, I've been following the work that Bryce Blum, the founder of ESG Law, had been doing. And so I'd kind of seen a little bit of this esports legal community developing. And my partner just said, you should look into it more. Like, you talk about it a lot, you're passionate about it. I had never actually considered it as a career path. It just seemed too non-traditional for me. So she really encouraged me to like look into the different areas of esports law and see what's out there for you. And I had done some immigration work pro bono my first year and really enjoyed it. And once you know it, after looking around a bit, there was an esports immigration attorney. So I reached out to Genie, and we're now about a year and a half later.
Are you guys like were you kind of into video games growing up or into esports, or was esports law kind of your first introduction to esports?
Great question. And I have kind of a funny story is, I was born in 1986. I grew up with like, SNES, Sega Genesis, like that generation. And I would play casually like with my brothers. But I would say into my adulthood, let's say in my 20s and now in my 30s, I actually hated video games. Um, and let me tell you why. It's because my boyfriend, now husband, is a gamer. And as I had mentioned, like before we started recording, we were in a long distance relationship. I was here in LA and then he was over in Japan. And so we had to manage time zones in order to have, Skype dates. And he would stand me up on so many of our Skype dates. Like he would just not show up because and these Skype dates for him, they were like 1 in the afternoon, like 2 in the afternoon. It's not like a weird hour for him. But he wouldn't show up because he was staying up all night gaming with his friends and then he just like slept in and he's the type of person where like they're a dead body when they sleep, like they can't wake up no matter how many alarms they set. So for that very reason, I very very much hated video games because I thought they were like ruining our relationship and that it was just a poor use of time. But then 3 years ago, I started gaming myself and I fell in love with it, and now our marriage is better for it. So,
It's a bit of a different story. I had been gaming basically my whole life. It was always a hobby of mine. And then I never really followed esports until actually no specifically when. It was 2013. My friends got me into Dota, and I went over to their house one day when they're having a party, and they were all watching TV. And I had never really seen competitive video games before, so I went to go see what was on. And it was actually the International 3 Grand Finals, Alliance v Navi, the El Clasico, as they call it. And I was just blown away. I was super excited about it. So from then on, I started watching Dota esports on and off over the years and kind of fell off, lost interest, I think in part because it was so fractured. I mean, the Dota scene still is in many ways, but especially back then. So it's kind of hard to follow for me. And then around 2018, two things happened. One was Overwatch League was announced, and my partner is a gamer, but she was never really into like esports titles. So I was super excited that we had teams we could both root for and watch it together. And that was also when the Esports Bar Association started. So those two things kind of coming together really like reignited my interest in it.
I guess I probably should have gotten into this at the start and given you congratulations on your title, Genie, of 2020 Sports Immigration Lawyer of the Year.
oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's an amazing accomplishment. What are your guys' titles in the roles that you have? I know that Jeannie, you do stuff for Immigrate LA and ESG Law, and Samuel, I know that you've done some stuff at those as well. So, what are your guys' titles in your roles?
Sure. So I am the founder and president of Immigrate LA, which is a law firm I started a few years ago that primarily works with like startups, emerging industries. And then I am also what we call of counsel to ESG law. And what that means in the legal world is that like basically I'm not like a full-time employee of ESG law, but I come in and I help them out as needed. And I guess in terms of like other titles, yes, I was awarded 2020 Sports Immigration Lawyer of the Year, which I'm extremely humbled and honored by. I've also been dubbed 40 under 40 for immigration lawyers. There's some other things, but they don't come to mind at the moment. And Samuel has worked with me through both of my law firms, both Immigrate LA and ESG Law, which I will let him explain.
Yeah, so my only title is law clerk, which Genie has bestowed on me. So I work at Immigrate LA with her, and a lot of my work centers around the work that she does for ESG as of counsel. And then, as you noted, I did do an internship directly with ESG, where I got familiar with the type of work that they do over with the team on that side.
Thank you for explaining the of counsel thing. I didn't quite understand that. As somebody who's like just completely removed from understanding law. So I guess I'd like to ask, how necessary are lawyers in the esports world, and would you guys say, or I guess kind of how underappreciated are they as well? Because really, the only time that I think of lawyers and having to do with esports is when there's like a big like lawsuit. So like the Tifu thing with FaZe
Yes.
Clan, or this happened a few years. I might have been in high school when this happened, but the Phantom Lord gambling scenario that happened. So those are really the only times that I think of esports and law like coexisting and working together. But I know that there's just like so many other things that lawyers do in esports. So could you kind of go elaborate on that?
Yeah, so lawyers are so important in the esports industry, specifically for kind of the stage and development and stage and growth that esports is in right now. And that's because, maybe 10, 15 years ago, esports was just like, some people get into the living room or, congregate in a garage and we have these informal competitions. But, fast forward to today, you've got like multi-million dollar, 100 employee companies that are team owners. You've got multi-million dollar prize pools. You've got like just millions and millions of people involved. And once an activity gets to that scale, you really need the law to come in and make sure that all of those processes are fair, all of those processes are legal, all of those processes are not stepping on anyone else's toes. And so, you mentioned a great example with the Tifu and FaZe lawsuit. That lawsuit may not even have been necessary if a good lawyer had represented FaZe early on when drafting Tifu's contract. This whole thing may never even have happened or existed. And so having a lawyer come in and kind of build the foundation or the framework for this esports house that you're building, it really makes sure that you're building the house on a strong foundation and not just, building it on sand. Because if you do that, the bigger you get, the faster that house is going to slide down and tumble into nothing. So yes, esports lawyers are very important. In terms of like underappreciation or understanding the value, I think I'll let Samuel give his thoughts on that.
I think there's often a disconnect where fans maybe think there are decisions a team can make exclusively that maybe there are actual legal implications that they don't know about. And so a lot of our work, which is trying to work with teams and players, is so critical for that, whether it be, signing agreements or trades. To just give one example, I often see on like Reddit or whatever it may be, players say or fans saying, why isn't this player being traded? Either they think they'll perform better on a different team or they just don't want them on the team anymore. And it may be that the team management does want to trade the player or they do want to sign some other player. But because of a specific visa situation, they just aren't able to. And so, from the fan perspective, all they're seeing is, well, this is a management decision they disagree with. But in reality, the team management and their lawyers are all involved in trying to put this together. And that's having a very real impact on the team's decisions.
Like, what are all the areas that esports needs law in? Like, what do you guys do on a daily basis as esports lawyers?
Sure. I actually gave a talk about this a couple weeks ago for the Esports Bar Association. But basically, every area of law that exists probably is involved in esports, with the exception of what we call health law, maritime law, which is like the laws of like boats navigating the oceans. But for us personally, on a day-to-day basis, we work on federal law, U.S. immigration law. We work a lot with contracts, which involve contract law as well as labor and employment law. Samuel, am I missing anything?
I think that mostly covers it. And I think it's easy just to think of it as, you know, it's not always great to make comparisons with traditional sports, but I think here you can. Any area you can think of in traditional sports where lawyers might be involved, including in ways that Ginny, was saying might not be obvious. In sports circles, there's going to be like family law attorneys that players know, and that when they're going through a divorce, they're going to be that type of person. And that attorney is going to specialize in working with, dividing up the assets of athletes. So there's always these little niches within the field.
That's great to know that esports law is not really too far removed from just traditional sports law. I think that'll make it a lot easier to understand for people, and especially for like people who have taken like sport management classes in college, having that comparison or knowing that it's pretty much just the same thing, just a different field is nice to know. I guess so. You guys had said that you really haven't been, I guess, like too deep into esports until 2 or 3, 4 years back, right? But we're, I guess, like looking back, when like esports was growing and whatnot, are there like a lot of legal, like I'm assuming that like esports organizations in their infancy were making just complete legal blunders for their first few years of operation. So do you guys like look back and kind of cringe at how esports orgs were operating in 2012, 2013?
Yeah, so those times were before my time. And so I I didn't have any kind of direct knowledge of what the culture was like back then, but there are definitely moments today where I do have those cringe moments where I'll talk to maybe a GM or a team owner or a sports agent, and they'll say, "Oh, this person doesn't need a visa, right? Like, 10 years ago, this person, if they wanted to come compete at Evo, they could just use their tourist visa and we'll just pay them under the table, like that, that's okay, right?" And I'd be like, "No, sir, that is not okay." But then they're used to working like that, right, from the early years like 2012, 2013, when maybe immigration enforcement wasn't as strict, and it wasn't as politicized or on the media's radar, where you could just have a player here on a tourist visa when they should actually be on an athlete visa. So things like that will sometimes come up where some actors, they still want to operate as if they want to operate fast and loose, or they want to operate as if, oh, like, oh, this is esports, it's not going to be on anyone's radar. But now it is. Like, if you just, I think I saw in the news this morning, there was this big article about David Beckham is going to buy or go public with his esports organization, and they're already valuating it at like $65 million. That stuff makes the news now. And so I don't think it's safe for people to assume now that, oh, just because esports involves video games, that we don't have to take it seriously. Samuel, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really helped that there's attorneys in the field now that have significant experience working directly in esports. And that wasn't the case before. Clearly, there's a lot of very capable attorneys working in the field, but they didn't have that experience directly in this niche. The benefit that comes with having reviewed your thousandth or 10,000th esport contract. And to just give one example from the immigration perspective, we recently were working on a case where this team came to us and they said, "Hey, we hired this other attorney. The attorney didn't have experience in esports, and so far it hasn't gone well." And so Jeannie and I reviewed that application, and I don't know if I'd use the word cringe, but it was pretty. There was a lot of flaws in it that we knew from our experience. And that's not a knock on that attorney. It was just they didn't have that experience working specifically in esports. They were just applying their general immigration background. And so there's just certain things that doesn't matter how well you know the law, how many years you've been practicing. If you haven't faced those same esports specific problems over and over, you're not going to know all the little tricks that you need to make it an efficient process for everyone.
So esports law has come a long way in the United States. I'm not sure if you have an answer for this, but what does esports law look like in other countries that are just as big on esports, if not bigger, like in South Korea? What does esports law look like in those countries?
Sure. So, to my knowledge, there's a huge demand for esports law and esports lawyers in Canada and in the UK because, esports is such a global international field. Like, it's almost like there's no borders when it comes to this community, this industry that we love. So, a lot of people will come to us and say, like, do I need to get a visa to the UK, or do I need to get a visa to Canada? And for me, because I'm a US lawyer, I actually can't advise on British immigration law or Canadian immigration law. I have to connect my client to someone who has the proper education and credentials in those countries. So the demand is there. I don't know if that demand is being met. So if there's anybody, in Canada or in the UK or in Europe studying to become a lawyer, like look into esports. Like there's a huge demand for people with that kind of expertise in those countries. When it comes to Japan and Korea, it's really interesting that in my experience and based on my relationships with attorneys in those countries, it's lawyers are less needed. Esports lawyers are less needed in those two countries because the governments of those two countries have done a really good job of regulating the industry or recognizing video games or esports, as a form of sport or athletics so that there's less gray area for people to kind of have to develop themselves. Like it's very cut and clear what a player, or what a team, or what a tournament is and is not. And it's explained in such a way that someone could probably figure it out without the help of a lawyer. But that's just not the case in the Western countries where there's not a lot of regulation at all. And that's where lawyers come in as we help our clients interpret what the law would be in the absence of regulations.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense, especially for Korea, just because they are so much more. Their esports scene is just so much more developed, and they've had just so much longer to develop it that it makes sense that I guess the government takes it a lot more serious and kind of has stuff more refined. And so I know that you have your own practice of law, Genie, Immigrate LA, but what are your guys' specialty in esports law? And what does, I guess, kind of what, we might have already touched on this a little bit earlier, but what does the process of what your specialty looks like, if I'm phrasing that question well?
Yeah, so Samuel and I have talked about this before, so I think he's going to have a really good answer to it. Samuel, what would you say we specialize at?
I think, at a broad level, obviously, immigration. Most of our work, I'd say just 80% of our work in the esports and gaming sphere, probably more, we're working with teams and organizations. So essentially, they will, have their professional Valorant team, and they'll want a player from the UK, and they'll approach us, and they'll say, "Can you help us with this?" And so we represent them. We also will be representing the player. We'll work mostly with the team to get the information that we need about the player, their immigration history, and we can look at mostly publicly available sources about how successful they've been. How can we make a case that they are eligible for a visa, and we can just guide them through that process. Our other work, also sometimes independently with streamers or sometimes with teams, is with streamers and influencers and helping them come to the United States so that they can perform, that they can stream, even if they're not necessarily competitors. And then every once in a while, there's just a large variety of type of work you can do in immigration. a lot of our esports clientele have executives that maybe they got their start in esports in Australia, but now they want to come and work directly at the team's HQ in the United States. So that's another type of immigration matter that we can help them with.
Yeah, I just want to add that yes, we have immigration experience. Yes, we have esports experience. We know the law, we know the scene. But I think what's special about working with us is that we, like, for example, the way we communicate, like, we know what Discord is, and we're happy to talk with our clients on Discord. Whereas I think traditional law firms probably use, email or get on the phone to speak with clients. And yeah, those are more professional, maybe more traditional ways of communication. But when you're talking to a 19-year-old, CSGO player in Sweden, they might not use email or they might not, be able to make an international phone call. So being able to meet our client where they're comfortable, I think is something that we add to the highly stressful experience of immigration.
We also make a strong effort to, in that same vein of things that maybe traditional law firms wouldn't do, to be on social media, to really be in the culture and the community. Because a typical immigration lawyer that you might hire for like an esports player visa, they'll do the work with you, but they're not going to be also, following that player's career. But there's been actually many instances where, because we're so involved in the community, because we're following them on Twitter or whatnot, we've seen something pop up that just in their day-to-day life could have been a serious immigration issue, but we were able to flag with the team, with the player, and able to get resolved without there being consequences. So being kind of proactive in that way is really a big part of what we try to do.
Samuel, when you were talking earlier, you mentioned something about streamers, and so this wasn't even something that I'd planned on. I didn't even think about. But are, I guess, esports lawyers very necessary for streamers?
Yeah, definitely. So to give kind of a direct example, you might have an esports team that has competitive teams, but then they also have their content creators, right? That's actually pretty critical to a lot of teams. And often those content creators are not from the United States, but they want to come here and stream, perform. This is what they're doing at either at like the team's fancy headquarters, or they want to do collaborations with other content creators, all those kinds of like, if you've ever followed a gaming influencer, you're familiar with this, these kind of like collaborations and sort of, house walkthroughs and all these types of things. And so what is important for the immigration perspective there is that if you're coming to the United States, you're a foreign national, and you are working in the United States, and you're going to need a visa. And that's what these streamers are doing. Oftentimes, they don't quite realize they're doing that. They might just think, well, I'm just going to the United States and I'm going to be on Twitch, and it's like a little vacation. But I think it's easy to kind of think of it as like, well, what if they were coming here and they were going to work at like a theater? Either way, they're performing from an audience, they're getting paid, whether it's by a theater or by Twitch. So the work that we do is we get a visa for them. We say that they're performers, and that way they can come here to the United States. They can work with authorization, and it's exciting because that's clearly just because streaming and influencers is such a new facet of life that there's not a lot of precedent for that in the immigration field. So it's something that Jeannie and I have had actually a lot of fun with trying to develop strategies for those folks.
Has the process for, I guess, getting visas and dealing in esports law gotten easier over time as esports has legitimized?
No, no, I wish. I wish. It's gotten so hard, just since 2017. Like, early 2017 was still pretty good. Like, I could get approvals within a couple of days or a couple of weeks. But as time went on and as the Trump administration started really putting into gear the plans that they had in place to really limit or crack down on immigration, it is so hard. Like, cases that would have been approved, in a blink of an eye just 2 years ago, now are getting denied. This immigration is just taking such a hardline stance and being so stingy with visas that we've actually had to sue them a couple of times, saying like, "Hey, you denied this petition, but actually the law says you should have approved it, so we're suing you. Please take back your denial. And we've won each time, but it's extremely just frustrating and expensive and time wasting for our clients.
So the process of like esports immigration is deeply political as well.
Samuel, what do you think?
Um, yeah, yes and no. It's political because immigration's political, right? And this is true. These issues that Jeannie was describing is true across all of immigration and also all of sports. So for the most part, because there's a little bit of a specific process for like major league athletes, they have not been impacted so much. But for folks that aren't in the major leagues, they're not in MLB, NBA, it's been hard because this administration is just very intent on slowing down the immigration process, even if it's warranted, even if it's lawful. And to just give an example, I mean, we were discussing recently how an NHL team had to sue over a visa that 5 years ago would have been approved immediately. So it's not just esports. We're seeing the NHL suing this administration. We've been sued the administration. And the hard thing with esports is, okay, so if you're an Olympic swimmer, maybe it's a little harder for you right now. They're questioning your credentials a bit. But if you're a gamer, if you're trying to convince the USCIS, the government, that this 17-year-old is internationally famous for his Clash Royale, like mobile play, that's going to be a lot harder naturally than it is, even when it's hard on, the best athletes in the world.
So I guess the main takeaway is all esports fans over that are eligible to vote need to get out and vote 2020, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, please go out and vote.
Um, so I kind of want to get into the Esports Bar Association. So could you guys kind of explain just what a bar association is, and then kind of tell me what the purpose of the EBA is?
Yeah, so what a bar association is in the field of law, we actually call the kind of the agency that gives us our license, they're called the bar, the state bar. And so what a bar association is just kind of like a club of attorneys who kind of share similar interests. So for example, there's like an immigration bar association or maybe a criminal defense lawyers bar association. And there's actually one called the video game bar association, the VGBA, that's pretty active in all things like gaming and digital entertainment. But I think the reason why the Esports Bar Association was started a few years ago was that, video games are a little bit different, right, than esports. Like esports occupies a niche within the wider field of video games. And so because our industry or our field of law just involves like Samuel said, issues of traditional sports combined with issues of like digital entertainment and video games generally, we thought that there was a need for an organization like the Esports Bar Association to bring together like-minded lawyers, to bring together lawyers who love video games and esports, and not just kind of be a club so that we can, hang out and game and network with each other, but we also discuss legal issues. We also publish, new ideas and write about esports issues. We host conferences and host like training seminars about updates in the law that's really focused on esports law. And I don't think there's any other organization in the world like it. Samuel, I know, is really involved with kind of the student section of the Esports Bar Association. What do you guys do there?
Yeah, so the student org, it doesn't directly fall under the EBA. It was something of the early law students who were interested in esports put together, and that's mostly just a place, the Discord channel, and a place to talk about career opportunities, a place to respond to news and events, and kind of give our legal take on it. And that's been really great. I joined it when I think there was 12 or so people, and I believe there's now over 100. So it's been really interesting seeing the growth and interest in the space. And there's been a lot of that. Really seeing both in that little Discord and also just in the EBA a lot of interest on the legal side from law students and from attorneys who are maybe trying to transition into the space.
And so you guys wrote a journal entry for I guess does the EBA like publish a journal every single year? And I guess you guys wrote one for that.
Yeah, the EBA started, I think this is the first year that they're publishing an academic journal. And so we submitted an article that has to do with obviously immigration law as it pertains to esports, and it got accepted. And I think we were competing against like a dozen other attorneys who submitted articles throughout the nation. And so we got selected, and it's supposed to be published in October. And I don't think it's gonna be like paper published because we're like the Esports Bar Association. Most of everything that we do is digital, but I'm really excited for the final product because we present like a really novel idea that hasn't really been talked about before.
Did you guys want to talk about that journal entry that you wrote, or I'm not sure if you're allowed to talk about it until it's published or what?
Yeah, we can talk about it. Samuel, do you want to give like a very high level kind of description of what we proposed?
So I'll try and go very high level first, which is that essentially what we wanted to do was there's actually about a half dozen academic articles out there about esports immigration, and they really focused on like, can esports players get visas and do they need their own visa category? And so in practice, we know that obviously they can. We do it every day, and so we wanted to kind of move the conversation forward a bit and look at something a bit more nuanced. And one thing that we've been seeing in our practice a lot was this basic question. And the foundation of that is, an athlete coming to the US on the athlete visa, which is called a P1 visa, they're supposed to be coming as the government interprets the law solely to participate in their designated competition. And so I know there's like public info out there about Johnny Cueto being on a P1 visa. I'm a SF Giants fan, so obviously I'm going to go to that. And so to use him as an example, he's going to come to the United States solely to play for the Giants and MLB, but the law also allows you to do some other activities that are related to the competition. So obviously he can practice with the team, right? That's not necessarily the competition, but it's related to it. It also allows you to do promotional activities. So anyone who's familiar with like baseball fans or sports in general, they often appear in the silly commercials telling folks to watch the games. But Johnny Cueto couldn't go work at Jamba Juice as well because that is not solely coming to the United States to perform in the MLB. That's him working basically a side job that he's not authorized to do. And so, in the same kind of vein that we were talking about earlier, he also wouldn't be able to go work at his local theater company and perform there. And so the question that arises in esports is, sure, esports players can get athlete visas, they can get the P1 visa and come to the United States and perform. But anyone who's familiar with esports knows that esport athletes also like to, and are often required to stream. They are on Twitch, they're playing their game. And if you think about that theater example, what's the difference between them performing at their local theater, what there is work they're being paid to do, or being paid by Twitch to stream? And so that's the kind of the big question that our article addresses is, okay, so an athlete, esports athlete wants to come to the United States, they want to stream, but they're only supposed to be here solely to compete in whatever their competition may be. So does streaming fall under any of the exceptions? And specifically, the one that we focused in on is it a promotional activity? Is the act of streaming something they're doing to promote the competition that they're in, the event that they're in? And so the article kind of works through the law a bit and addresses, what variety of streaming, different ways that players can and do stream that would make them more fall under that promotional activity and less just performing at their local neighborhood theater.
Thanks for bringing that analogy full circle because we had talked about the streaming stuff earlier. Is that a situation that happens frequently? Because I've never even considered it. I know that a lot of teams, or at least used to, teams would have like, streaming requirements for players. So is that something that you guys have to tackle a lot?
Yeah. So I would say, probably 99% of the contracts that we see on a daily basis, there is some sort of streaming requirement. Like it could range from like, 10 hours to 100 hours a month or a week or something, depending on the title that the player plays. So there's definitely streaming requirements in the contracts, but why it became an issue for me and Samuel as immigration practitioners and why we wanted to write this article was because immigration started pushing back on these contracts, saying, well, I thought this person is just supposed to be an athlete. Why are they streaming? Like, why are they promoting themselves and not the sport or not the game? And basically, they were calling streaming an illegal activity. And so that's why we as esports lawyers, we have to go back and educate immigration saying, well, streaming is not necessarily only self-promotion. Streaming is technically, player might be in solo queue, like they might technically be practicing for their match by streaming. Streaming is also a promotional activity, like they have the team's overlay, they might be wearing their jersey, or they might have like a league overlay on their stream. That's also promotional activity for the team or the league. So we have to explain those things because the average immigration officer who's 40, 50, 60-year-old person who probably has no idea what esports is, like they just don't innately know these things. And so our job is to explain it to them in a way that makes sense to them. And so we often use traditional sports analogies using like baseball or basketball or football.
Is that something that you guys think will get easier over time? Is explaining that or what? Because it is just really hard to explain esports to usually anybody over the age of 50. Um, but is that something that you think will get easier as time goes on?
Samuel, what do you think?
Yes. First of all, because everyone should vote in November, so hopefully that'll make it easier. But also, I think as far as like familiarity, definitely. I think, to give one example, we were recently communicating with a government official about a case where we'd run into a snag, and having this phone call with the official, they said, "Hey, actually, I was really excited to hear from you guys. I'm a fan of the player." And so we were kind of blown away by that, and I think it actually made the process a little bit easier for us, just because they understood the implications of the visa and how the player was a big deal. Whereas if we had gone someone else assigned to that case, like you were saying, they could be, a 60-year-old person who just has no idea that esports even exists, and so they're going to question everything about the process, everything about the player.
So Jeannie, you kind of started like traditionally in law, and then you transferred, or you do kind of esports law partially, because you still do like Immigrate LA. That's like your main career, right?
I would actually say when I first started working in esports, like back in 2017, I would say like 70% of my work was Immigrate LA and then 30% ESG. But over time, it's really shifted. And so my main focus now, I would say it's flipped. Like 70% is now ESG and esports stuff, and then 30% is like family immigration or my startup clients.
So that's I'd kind of like to get both your perspectives on this then, since you kind of started like traditionally, and Samuel, you're finishing up at university. What are kind of the successes and pitfalls that you guys see in young professionals trying to like break into esports law?
Hmm. I I'm just gonna embarrass Samuel and say, if you want to be successful, be like Samuel.
I'm
Because
embarrassed now.
yes, because this is what he did, okay, is back in 2018, I was not looking for interns at all. But one day, I just got a random email in my inbox from this person named Samuel saying, hi, I'm a student at UCI. Sorry to contact you like this. Like, this is probably not like the appropriate avenue to ask this question, but I'm really passionate about immigration and esports. And I was wondering if you're offering an internship. And, as I said, I was not at all looking for interns, but something about the way he just kind of like his passion, his courage, and just taking that leap and reaching out and asking the question, it really impressed me. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm still not going to give him an internship, but he took the time out to write me this really nice email. So I'm just going to call him and give him the time of day and just like talk to him, maybe give him some career advice. And then we got on the phone, and then he impressed me even more on the phone. And I was like, you know what? Like, I really think this kid is promising. Like, I really think I want to make an internship up for him. And that's exactly what we did. And he just continues to keep impressing me with his work product, his passion, his attention to detail, his ambition, just really going above and beyond like any assignment that's assigned to him. And so I just keep rehiring him. And now, we've worked together for over 2 years. So I would say I think that's an indicator of success. It's like if there is no path forward that you see for you, like be a Samuel and like basically get a bulldozer and create that path yourself.
The part that Janie leaves out is that in part of the application, I also think I mentioned I was starting to become bilingual and learn Japanese, and she can tell you that 2 years later, that is not the case. So I was maybe a little ambitious with that, but yeah, I appreciate that, and I think it's just a weird industry on the legal side because typically in law, many of the sought after positions, whether it's like big law, as I was discussing earlier, or in the government, the path to them is hard, but it's well worn. You can go to your career counselor on day one of law school and say, "Hey, I want to be a United States assistant attorney," and they'll tell you the way to get there. It might be hard, you might not be successful, but it's a pretty clear path. With esports, that's not the case, right? If you look at the folks who are practicing right now and who haven't been successful, they come from such a variety of backgrounds. Some did work in big law and had a decade career and then have transferred into the space. Some have gone directly from law school and like an esports legal internship, and now they're working. And so I think if you're a young professional, it's hard and you're trying to figure out what moves you should make. One that comes to mind is a success and a pitfall, and that's very unique about esports, is that the successful attorneys in the space that you would want as a mentor or potential someone to hire you are all incredibly accessible. Everyone's on Twitter, and that is not the case if you want to, work in a prestigious land use firm in Orange County or something. And so the bright side of that is you can reach out to them, you can interact with them, you can get your name out there a lot easier than you could in many careers, and especially in law. I think a pitfall is you also have to be careful with that because it's very easy to develop an online reputation that isn't maybe the first impression that you want, or that you can over rely on it and say, well, as long as I'm getting my name in front of this person, that's going to be what propels me to a job in the future, when maybe they're looking for a candidate that has interesting experiences or has started their own project, and they are less interested in just someone that they know from community events or from Twitter.
Yeah, I'd like to say, first of all, I hope all my references that I've ever used for like a job application sound just like Jeannie does describing you, Samuel, because she just gave you 5 out of 5 stars for everything. But that sounds like very stereotypical, like esports career aspirations at the like for most things in esports, right? Is if there's not a clear cut path, then you kind of have to reach your neck out and make it happen yourself. But I guess I kind of wasn't really expecting that for esports law, and maybe that's just because like law seems a lot more prestigious than most other career fields. And so, Samuel, I'd like to you were kind of interviewed, I guess, by UCI about esports law, and in that interview you talked about here I just kind of have a quote, so I'll just kind of read it out, and then can you kind of elaborate more and give me your thoughts on it?
Yeah, definitely.
So you said that you're presently working with fellow EBA members to establish a pro bono program where economically disadvantaged players can receive critical representation when negotiating contracts.
Yeah, so there was a group of attorneys in the space and EBA that wanted to and still do put together that project. And it's exciting because there's been some efforts on it in the past that haven't quite come together, but there clearly is a need. Less so now, I think, but definitely still for players to have, I think, just accessible counsel. Whether it's economically disadvantaged or just they're an information gap, I think often the problem players run into is that they it doesn't even occur to them to get a lawyer. It doesn't even occur to them to have someone look at the contract before they sign it. And so having a space that's accessible, that's not some sort of imposing having to hire a law firm is a real goal of ours. I think one of the big challenges is what Jeannie touched on earlier, is that you really need to make sure you structure in a way that the legal field is very regulated and you want to make sure you're doing everything right. So if players are from a different country, if there's jurisdiction issues, there's a lot of issues like that that make it hard to put that together. But I know it's something that a lot of us still want to see happen because there's definitely a gap in the space for that.
I guess that idea is kind of similar to if you don't have anybody to represent you in like a court case, then you'll be provided one. Is that kind of like the general idea behind that?
I think the idea is that anytime you have a community, a population that might not have the traditional advantages to have access to counsel, it's important that they have that resource. So what you're referencing is, at least in most jurisdictions, exclusively in the criminal law context. Many do not provide that in like civil laws or like lawsuits or whatever it may be. But yeah, it's the same core idea.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's really all the topics and questions that I had written down. But is there like anything that you guys would like to talk about or like to present to kind of esports fans that you think they should know, or is there anything that I'm kind of missing out on that would be good to know?
I would just like encourage listeners, especially if you're younger and the people who you look up to, like maybe your parents or, your old bosses, if you look to them for career advice and you say, "Oh, I want to do this thing in esports," they might look at you like you're crazy or they might not take you seriously because it has to do with video games. Don't get discouraged by that. It's really just a product of ignorance. They really just don't know, they don't understand. But I think what's in your favor is if those people's opinion, like they really matter to you and those people's support really matter to you, pull up articles like in Forbes, in Business Insider, in the Harvard Business Journal that talk about esports and that really put some big numbers to the topic. And I promise you that will get your mentor's attention and they will start taking you seriously. And you can kind of turn the tables on them and they can teach you business or they can teach you traditional skills and you can teach them about esports so that when they go to their next like cocktail party, they can be like the cool person in the room who knows all about esports.
Yeah, no, I would just say it's my turn to praise Jeannie and just say find a mentor in the space that is going to really support you and believe in you and open up doors for you. Because even, in my limited experience so far, that's been because Jeannie took a chance on me and has guided me through whether it's just been law school questions or esports career questions. And made it possible for me to go to like industry events and introduced me to people at those events. And so finding that important and finding that mentor is just so important. And not just because, they're really famous or they're really well known in esports. When I was talking earlier about how my partner encouraged me to look around the space, one of the things I did was when I was looking at, potential places to apply, I watched a bunch of podcasts and interviews that Jeannie did. And I realized that we had a lot in common, that we shared a lot of the same values, even when it comes to things like social justice or just sense of humor and stuff like that. And so that was a huge part of the reason why I wanted to connect with her. So I would say find someone that not only is successful, not only that they maybe are in the place that you want to be later on in your career, but that you want to talk to and hang out with and you think that you would make a good connection with.
Well, thank you guys so much for talking about esports law with me and for the advice that you've given. I know that like coming into this, I really didn't know. Well, first of all, I just don't know much about like law in general, but especially esports law. I'm just like pretty ignorant to everything that you guys do and what you guys do behind the scenes to make stuff happen. So thanks for coming on and explaining that to me and helping me and the listeners understand. Do you guys have any do you guys want to shout out your social medias or have anything else you want to say?
Sure. If you're interested in all things esports, immigration, and visas, you can find me on Twitter. I usually tweet in real time, like as soon as news happens. My handle is pure Pure Genie Genie US. That's pure Genie us. And yeah, if you have questions, feel free to DM me. I don't bite.
Yeah, and if you want to see me retweet the things that Genie tweets, you can find me on Twitter at Freeyosh, Freeyosh.
Today's episode with Genie and Samuel was super informative, and I'm so glad I had them on the show. They did an amazing job of simplifying their roles and breaking down esports law for me. I hope you guys learned just as much as I did from this interview. Make sure you guys check out Genie and Samuel on their socials if you're interested in esports law. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Esports Careers Podcast, help us spread the word by rating and reviewing the podcast. That way, I can keep making great episodes for you to listen to, and it helps other people find us too. If you've got a question for me or someone you'd like me to interview, you can reach me on Twitter at DweebGG. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.